The mountain did not care for names. It was a monolith of granite and silence, a geography of jagged truths that had long ago stripped the woman of her own. She was simply a feature of the landscape now, weathered and enduring as the ancient pines that clawed at the sky. Her cabin was a knuckle of wood clenching a ledge, a place built not for comfort but for defense against memory. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and the ghost of a lullaby she could no longer bring herself to hum. Her life was a rhythm of survival, a metronome of chopping wood, checking snares, and staring into the fire as if it held the answers she had climbed so high to escape. Her hands, calloused and capable, knew the language of mending nets and skinning rabbits, but they had forgotten the soft cartography of a child's face. She was a fortress of solitude, her heart a hollow cavern where grief echoed without end. Each sunrise painted the eastern peaks in hues of rose and regret, and each sunset bled across the west, a daily wound that refused to close. Winter was her chosen season, its brutal honesty a mirror to the frost that had claimed her soul. The snow fell in thick, silent sheets, burying the world and muffling its pointless noise, offering her the illusion of a clean slate. It was a beautiful, desolate kingdom, and she was its lonely, grieving queen, ruling over an empire of loss. She moved with the heavy grace of a glacier, her physical form immense, a testament to years of labor and the sheer weight of carrying a past that was heavier than any log she could haul to her hearth. The silence was her companion, her accomplice, her punishment. It was a living thing, breathing in the space where laughter once was, settling in the chair that had long sat empty. She did not speak, for there was no one to hear, and nothing left to say. The silence was shattered by the intrusion of men from the valley below. They were loud, their laughter like stones clattering down a scree slope, coarse and unwelcome. They smelled of stale beer and cheap tobacco, an offense to the clean, sharp air of her domain. They trudged to her door through the deep snow, their presence a violation of the pact she had made with the mountain. She stood in the doorway, a sentinel armed with nothing but her stillness, her great height and breadth a silent command for them to leave. They did not fear her, but they were unnerved by her, by the sheer, unblinking intensity of her gaze. They saw her as a beast, a feral thing, and so they had brought her a joke fit for one. "Got something for you, mountain mama," one of them slurred, spitting a brown stream near her boots. He jerked his head towards a burlap sack slumped in the snow. It moved. From the sack, they pulled a boy. He was small and thin, his face smudged with dirt and terror, his dark eyes wide and unreadable. He could not have been more than 7. He was of a different land, his features a map of a place she would never know. "Bought him off a river trader," the man crowed. "Some kind of foreign orphan. Figured you were lonely up here." "A little pet to keep the wolves away," the other men snickered, their amusement a poison in the air. Ilara's face was stone. She felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not shock. She felt only the vast, familiar emptiness, now disturbed by this unwelcome ripple. She wanted them gone. She wanted her silence back. She paid them the pittance they asked for, the coins a cold weight in her palm, a transaction for a life she had no intention of keeping. She did it only to make them leave, to restore the quiet order of her world. They left, their laughter fading back down the trail, leaving the boy standing alone in the snow, a small, dark shape against the overwhelming white. He was a piece of refuse, a cruel punchline, and she had no room for him in her meticulously curated desolation. That night, the mountain unleashed its fury. A blizzard screamed down from the peaks, a banshee wail that rattled the very bones of the cabin. She had left the boy on the porch, sheltered only by the overhang of the roof, a pathetic offering to the storm. She told herself it was a test. The mountain would decide. It was the way of things here, the strong survived, the weak were reclaimed by the earth. She sat by her fire, the wind clawing at the windows, trying to find its way in. It was the same wind that had howled on another night, a lifetime ago. A memory, sharp and jagged, pierced through the layers of her resolve, the memory of a fever, of a tiny body shivering itself still, of a silence that fell after the storm had passed, a silence far more terrible than any blizzard. The boy on the porch was not her child. He was not her responsibility. He was a stray, a ghost, an anchor she refused to let drag her down into the depths she had fought so hard to escape. but the wind howled his vulnerability. It whispered of small hands turning blue, of a fragile breath turning to frost. Her own breath hitched. A war raged within the cavern of her heart, the disciplined ice of her grief battling a rogue current of something warm and painful. It was a feeling she had buried, an instinct she had starved. With a guttural cry that was more animal than human, she threw open the door. The wind tore at her, but she stood against it, a giantess of indecision. The boy was huddled in a corner, a small, tight ball of misery, not even shivering anymore. He looked up at her, his dark eyes showing no fear, only a profound and weary acceptance. She scooped him up. He was lighter than a sack of flour. She carried him inside and deposited him on the rag rug by the hearth, as far from her own chair as possible. She did not look at him again. She had let the storm in, and now she did not know how to get it out. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light against the snow. A silent truce existed between them. She moved through her chores with a rigid, practiced economy, and he stayed on his rug, a small, silent observer of her orbit. He was a planet she refused to acknowledge. She gave him scraps of food, a hunk of bread, a bowl of thin stew, placing them on the floor without a word, as one might for a dog. She did not meet his eyes. To look at him was to see him, and to see him was to invite a pain she could not bear. He, in turn, watched her with an unnerving stillness. He watched her mend her snowshoes, the needle moving with grim precision. He watched her sharpen her axe, the rhythmic scrape of stone against steel filling the cabin. He watched her stare into the flames, her face a mask of impenetrable sorrow. The tension in the small space was a third presence, a taut wire humming between them. One evening, as she was banking the fire for the night, her hand brushed against a loose stone in the hearth. It shifted, and from the small cavity behind it, a tiny object fell onto the floor with a soft clatter. It was a bird, carved from pale birchwood, its wings outstretched in perpetual flight. Its surface was worn smooth from years of being held. She froze, her entire body seizing as if struck by lightning. The air left her lungs. It was her most sacred relic, the last thing she had carved for her daughter. Before she could snatch it back into its hiding place, the boy moved. Quicker than she could have imagined, he scrambled from his rug and picked it up. He held the wooden bird in his small, grimy palm, his head tilted in careful examination. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. He would break it. He would defile it. He would ruin the last piece of her. He looked from the bird to her face, his gaze clear and penetrating, seeing past the stone to the ruin beneath. Then, he spoke. His voice was raspy from disuse, the words heavily accented, broken. But they were clear. "Anya," he said. And the world stopped. The name, her daughter's name, hung in the air like a splinter of ice. It was a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in a decade, a name she herself no longer dared to form with her own lips. For a long, silent moment, she could only stare at him, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and disbelief. How? How could this stranger, this piece of human driftwood washed up at her door, know that name? The only possible answer bloomed in her mind, a black and poisonous flower. The men. The lowlanders. They had not just abandoned him here, they had armed him. They had given him this word, this single, poisoned arrow, and told him to fire it at her heart, a final, twisting act of cruelty. They had wanted to see if the beast of the mountain could still bleed. A wave of fury, cold and pure, washed through her, eclipsing the shock. But the fury was not for the boy. He was just the messenger, an unwitting weapon in their sick game. Her rage was for them, for the casual, festering malice of the world below, a world she had fled for this very reason. The boy, still holding the bird, watched the storm pass across her face. He saw the shift, the change in the emotional weather. He had expected a blow, a shout, a casting out. Instead, he saw the ice of her eyes crack, revealing something raw and fiercely protective beneath. She knelt before him, the movement stiff and unfamiliar. She did not take the bird. She simply held out her hand, palm up. A truce. A question. He looked at her hand, then at her face, and gently placed the wooden bird into her palm. His touch was feather-light. In that moment, the transaction was complete. He was no longer a package, no longer a joke. He was a child who had been used, a fellow victim of the world's cruelty. That night, she gave him a blanket. She pointed to the small cot in the corner, a place that had been empty for 10 years. It was his now. The thaw had begun. Winter clung to the mountain with stubborn claws, but inside the cabin, a fragile spring was taking root. The silence between them changed. It was no longer a void of hostility and grief, but a shared space of quiet observation. Words were still a currency they did not trade in, but a new language formed in their absence, a language of gesture and shared purpose. She began to teach him. She would hold up a track in the snow, the delicate print of a fox, the heavy tread of a deer, and he would watch, his dark eyes absorbing the knowledge. She showed him how to read the weather in the clouds, how to find the driest kindling, how to bank the fire so it would smolder through the night. It was a tutelage of survival, a passing down of the mountain's harsh wisdom. He was a quick study, his small hands eager to mimic hers. He learned to clean a fish with a small, sharp knife, his movements becoming more confident each day. One afternoon, she gave him a block of birchwood and her second-best knife. She demonstrated the first few cuts, the way to peel back the bark and find the shape hidden within the grain. For days, he sat by the fire, whittling away, his brow furrowed in concentration. She would glance over, pretending not to watch, and see the focus in his young face, the determination. He was not just carving wood, he was carving out a place for himself in this small, isolated world. When he was finished, he presented his creation to her. It was another bird, rougher than hers, its wings a little crooked, but it was unmistakably a bird in flight. Without a word, he walked to the hearth, placed his carving next to hers on the mantelpiece, and stepped back. Two birds, flying together. A flock. A family. When the first true thaw came and the world began to weep snowmelt, they went outside and turned over the hard soil in her small, protected garden plot. Together, they planted seeds for beans and squash, their hands, one large and calloused, one small and learning, working side by side in the rich, dark earth. As the sun grew stronger, the mountain exploded into a riot of green. Life, tenacious and determined, pushed up through the last patches of snow. The cabin, once a hermitage sealed by winter, now kept its door open to the warm, pine-scented air. Ilara found that the rhythms of her life, once solitary, now had a counterpart. Her shadow was accompanied by a smaller one. Lin, as she had learned his name was from a tag sewn into his tattered jacket, became her echo. He followed her on her trap lines, his short legs working hard to keep up with her long, ground-eating strides. He learned the silent patience of waiting, the sharp-eyed skill of spotting a rabbit frozen in the undergrowth. He learned which berries were sweet and which were poison, which mushrooms were for the stew pot and which were to be left for the forest floor. He grew stronger, the gaunt look in his face replaced by a healthy roundness. The mountain was his teacher, and she, his silent guide. The hollow cavern in her chest was no longer an echoing void. It was slowly, cautiously, being filled. Not with a replacement for what she had lost, that was impossible, but with something new. A different kind of warmth. A purpose that went beyond mere survival. Her immense strength, once a barrier to the world, was now his shield. When a sudden summer storm rolled in, she would shelter him under her greatcoat. When he stumbled on a loose rock, her hand would be there, quick and sure, to steady him. He, in turn, offered his own gifts. He would return from a walk with a fistful of wildflowers, leaving them in a chipped cup on the table. He would hum a quiet, unfamiliar tune while he worked, a melody from his forgotten country, and the sound would weave itself into the fabric of the cabin's new life. It was a life built not on words, but on shared meals, on mutual reliance, on the quiet, profound acknowledgement of seeing and being seen. The fortress of her solitude had been breached, not by force, but by the persistent, gentle presence of a child who had needed a home. There was a chest at the foot of her bed, made of dark, heavy wood, its lock rusted with time and disuse. It held the last remnants of the woman she used to be, a Pandora's box of sorrow she never opened. One afternoon, she returned from gathering firewood to find the cabin silent. A prickle of unease, sharp and unfamiliar, ran up her spine. She found Lynn in her room, kneeling before the chest. He had found the old iron key where she kept it hidden, and the lid was open. Her first instinct was a surge of protective anger, a desire to slam the lid shut and guard her ghosts from his innocent eyes. But she stopped. He was not rummaging. He was simply looking, his hands in his lap, his expression one of solemn curiosity. Spread on the floor were the contents, a tiny, faded calico dress, no bigger than a doll's, a single, scuffed baby shoe with a frayed lace, and a cracked photograph of a younger Ilara, smiling, her face soft and open, standing beside a man with kind eyes. In her arms, she held a swaddled infant. The woman in the picture was a stranger to her now. Ilara walked slowly into the room and knelt beside him. She did not scold him. She did not speak. She simply reached out a hand and gently touched the soft fabric of the little dress. It was a silent confession. An offering of her most profound wound. Lynn looked at her, then back at the photograph. He pointed a small finger at the baby. Then he pointed at the empty space beside Ilara. His meaning was clear, a question asked without a single word. Where did they go? Ilara's vision blurred. A single tear, the first in a decade, escaped and traced a hot path down her weathered cheek. She did not wipe it away. She let him see it. She took his small hand in her own, her calloused fingers wrapping around his, and together, they knelt before the relics of a life that was gone, two silent mourners sharing a grief that had finally found a witness. The lowlanders returned in the heat of high summer. The air was thick and heavy, buzzing with flies and the promise of a storm. They came not with jokes this time, but with a greedy, swaggering confidence. They had heard whispers in the valley that the mountain woman had not only kept the boy but had somehow made him thrive. They saw the flourishing garden, the neat stack of winter wood, the smoke curling from the chimney. They saw a homestead, and where they saw a homestead, they saw value. Well, look at that, the leader sneered, the same man as before. You cleaned him up good, he eyed Lynn, who stood half hidden behind Ilara's legs, his small hands clutching the back of her trousers. We've come to take him back. Got a better offer. A couple who can't have their own. They'll pay a pretty price for a healthy boy. Ilara did not move. She was a mountain herself, rooted to the spot, immovable. The years of solitude and silence had forged her into something unyielding. All the pain, all the grief, all the quiet healing of the past months coalesced into a single point of cold, diamond-hard resolve. She had retreated from the world to escape its cruelty, but now its cruelty had followed her home. It had come to take the only thing that had made that home a living place again. She had let her daughter be taken by a fever, by a fate she could not fight. She would not let this child be taken by the greed of broken men. The world had taken from her once. It would not take from her again. She felt Lynn press closer against her, a small, warm anchor in the storm of her rage. This was no longer about her past. This was about his future. Her silence was her weapon. She did not shout, she did not plead, she did not reason. She simply stood, her sheer physical presence a declaration of war. Her gaze did not waver from the leader's face. It was not a look of hatred, but of absolute, implacable certainty. It was the look of a mother bear defending her cub, a force of nature that does not negotiate. The man took a step forward, his hand reaching out. Now, don't be stupid, woman. His not yours. Before his hand could get close, Ilara moved. It was not a violent motion, but it was swift and final. She raised her hand, the one that could split logs with a single blow, and held it up, palm out. A wall. A boundary. An unbreakable law. Stop. The man hesitated, his bravado faltering in the face of such primal authority. His companions shuffled their feet, suddenly aware of the deep isolation of the place, of the immense, silent power of the woman before them. They had come expecting a feral hermit, they had found a queen on her throne. Just then, Lynn did something unexpected. he stepped out from behind her legs to stand beside her. He was small, and he was trembling, but his chin was up. In his hand, he held his carving knife, the one she had given him. He held it not as a threat, but as a tool, a symbol of his place here, his hand gripping it just as he had seen her grip her axe. He was not her victim to be saved, he was her partner in this fight. He stood his ground. He belonged here. The sight of them together, the Giant Tess and the boy, a united front of silent defiance, was more powerful than any threat. The men looked at each other. There would be no easy profit here. There would be a fight they could not win, a fight against something they did not understand. With a curse, the leader spat on the ground, turned, and led his men back down the mountain, their greed defeated by a love that had never spoken its name. The mountain settled back into its peaceful quiet. The seasons turned, painting the landscape in the fiery hues of autumn. The air grew crisp, and the first frost silvered the edges of the leaves. The winter, when it returned, was different. It was no longer a symbol of Ilara's desolate heart. The snow fell in the same thick, silent sheets, but it no longer felt like a burial. It was a blanket, tucking the world in, protecting the warmth and life hidden within the cabin walls. The fire in the hearth burned brightly, a beacon of home, not a pyre for memories. The two wooden birds still sat on the mantelpiece, their wings forever outstretched, a testament to a family forged in silence and survival. The hollow cavern of her grief was not empty. It was a room in her heart that was now filled with new light, its sad echoes softened by the quiet sounds of a life being lived, the scrape of a knife on wood, the soft bubbling of a stew, the rustle of a page being turned in a book she was teaching him to read. One evening, as the snow fell softly outside the window, she looked across the hearth at the boy. He was concentrating on a new carving, his tongue stuck out from the corner of his mouth in intense focus. The shadows from the fire danced on his face, illuminating his serene expression. The word, which had been resting on her tongue for months, finally rose. It was simple, and it held the weight of everything. "Lin," she said, her voice rough from disuse but clear and warm as the firelight. He looked up from his work, his dark eyes meeting hers. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, a sunrise after a long night. He did not need to say her name. She already knew who she was. She was home.